You are listening to Social Europe podcast. We discuss cutting-edge thinking on politics, economy, and employment and labour with some of the most thought-provoking people around, including Nobel Prize winners and other internationally acclaimed experts. So welcome and enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to episode 24 of Social Europe podcast. My name is Henning, Meyer, editor-in-chief of Social Europe. My conversation partner today is Rene Cuperus, and we're going to talk about the PvdA, the Dutch Social Democratic Party. We're going to engage in a discussion about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, as well as threats that the party faces, and what an appropriate reaction to those could be. This podcast is part of a project that Social Europe runs with the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung of SWOT Analysis of progressive parties from across the world. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So, Rene Cuperus, thank you very much for joining us today in the SWOT Analysis project of different social democratic parties and progressive parties across the world. And we're going to talk about the Dutch case today, the PvdA, and its position and its strategic objectives. So, first of all, I mean, in order to get us going, what is the historic position of the Social Democratic Party in the Netherlands in the political system, and where does it currently stand?
That's a big question to start with, but I will try to give an answer. Now, you should compare the Dutch political system more or less with the German political system. So there were two post-war people's parties which were dominant in the political system, both the Christian Democratic People's Party and the Social Democratic People's Party. Those were the dominant forces since the 50s, since the Second World War. And the Christian Democrats were a bit more dominant, like the Social Democrats, exactly the same, like in Germany, where you have the same kind of disbalance between Christian democracy and social democracy. So what we see in the Netherlands is the build-up of a post-war welfare state, like in Germany, like in Scandinavia, like in France or Belgium, like in Western Europe, a liberal democracy, and what I would call a post-war middle-class society. And that's, I think, the strength of this combination of Christian democracy and social democracy, that they were able to build a middle-class society is combining a rather egalitarian level of equality and inequality and a social market economy. And in that story, the Social Democratic Party of the Netherlands, the PvdA, the Labour Party, played a pivotal role. So that's to start with. That's the historical legacy of the PvdA, that it was one of the pillars of the post-war society of the Netherlands. But what we see, and it's a story which is true for all the social democratic parties in Europe, is we see a permanent revision of social democracy since the Second World War. First of all, we saw that this party, which was the champion of the welfare state, radicalized in the 60s and in the 70s. In the Netherlands, it was a rather extreme radicalization. The PvdA became more or less a Marxist party or a radical left party. It was penetrated by the new academics, which were the children or the grandchildren of the workers. And they took over more or less this working class party. So this party transformed from a working class party to a party for progressives, for hippies, for the emancipation of feminism, of homosexuality, gender rights, these kind of things. This was the story of the PvdA in the 60s and the 70s. Then we had a new revision in the 80s due to the economic crisis and to the crisis of the welfare state. Then first we had this problem of social democracy in the long years of the desert, that we were not able to be elected, like the SPD in Germany was not able to get elected against Kohl, like the Labour Party in the UK was not able to get elected against Thatcher. We had the same kind of problem in the Netherlands, that we were out of the political center for a decade, more or less, in the economic crisis of the 80s, and only by a new revision, transforming from a working class party and a party for progressive academics into a third way party, or more or less social liberal party, we were able to get elected again in the 80s and early 90s. And that's permanent revision, this permanent change of the image or the character of the party. I think it is one of the stories, one of the causes for the crisis of social democracy. That the permanent revision led to a problem of credibility and trust within the wider electorate.
And where does the party currently stand? I mean, against the backdrop of recent elections?
Oh yeah, that's it. At the moment, it's really in big crisis. I think the PvdA is doing worse in Europe. We lost the biggest historical defeat in Dutch political history in the last elections. We went from 26% to 6% in one election, from 38 seats in a 150-seat parliament to 9 seats at the moment in a 150-seat parliament. And I think now we are about the 7th party in the Netherlands, both in real terms and in the polls at the moment. So we are talking here about a total breakdown of Dutch social democracy since the last election. And this is really a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe for this party and for the history of the party. And the big miracle is, or the big mystery is, what are the real causes? What are the possibilities to rebuild this party? What's really going on? But I can elaborate on that a bit later.
Okay, and if you come to the core of the SWOT analysis, I mean, what is your view? What are the particular strengths of the PvdA? And I mean, you already mentioned some of the core weaknesses, but
yes.
where do you think the strengths and weaknesses lie, and where the balance is?
It's hard to talk about strength of a party of 9 seats in parliament, which was one of the biggest parties of the Netherlands before. So that's just. But one of the strengths still is it's a bit complicated. You could say one of the strengths of the PvdA or the Dutch social democracy is that we turned the Netherlands into a social democratic country. So the legacy may be that the country is far more social democratic than the power position of the social democracy is demonstrating. So the strengths may be the penetration of the ideas and the ideology within the wider society. That would be one way of responding to that question, because after all, the Netherlands is quite an egalitarian country still, comparable to Scandinavian levels. So it's very still, despite the Wilders right-wing populist revolt, it's still a very tolerant, open, and libertarian country, in line with the social democratic values in this respect. So I think for outsiders, for Americans or for Chinese, they would conceive the Netherlands as a very social democratic country. So that's a miracle, that we live in a social democratic country with a very weak and even very weakened social democratic party. Part of the explanation, and I think I would say that right now, is the political system in the Netherlands, the electoral system and the political system, which is quite different from countries around the Netherlands. We have a very extreme representative system. There's nearly no hurdle to enter parliament. So it's extreme. So the political system is extremely visible, demonstrating all the currents in society. So we have about 10 to 15 parties in parliament. So this means that all the parties, especially the bigger parties, have to deal with extreme competition, party competition. And if you look at the left in the Netherlands, on the left, we have 5 different parties, all competing with the Social Democratic parties, and which is completely different from the Labour Party competition in the UK or the SPD competition in Germany. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have the competitors of the PvdA are the Green Left, the Green parties, the Green Party of the Netherlands. We have a Social Liberal Party for academic professionals, D66, which is also on the left, more or less. We have a Socialist Party, which conceives itself to be a classic social democratic party against a third way neoliberal social democratic party. We have a party for the animals, for animal welfare, and we have a party for the elderly. And all parties are circling around this formerly Big Tent party of social democracy. And if you look at the last elections, you see that because of disappointment and discontent with the latest government performance of the Social Democratic Party, the PvdA, in terms of austerity and welfare state reform, the Social Democratic Party, the PvdA, more or less exploded into all these different constituent parts. So we exploded, the Social Democratic Big Tent Party exploded in all these fragmented, smaller parties around it. And that's what happened. And the big question is, can you rebuild this Big Tent Party out of all these smaller constituent parties, which are now rather strong in parliament?
So the way you resolve that paradox that you say, on the one hand, the Dutch society and the Dutch politics is very egalitarian, very social democratic, but at the same time the party is doing very badly, is because the electoral system incentivizes a fragmentation and polarization in the system. But at the same time, these 5 or 6 parties that you mentioned on the left, is the vote share stable? So is it just a matter of how a relatively stable vote share shifts between these parties?
More or less, but at the last election we saw a shift to the right, to be honest. We see in the Netherlands, and I think that's true for the whole Western Europe, we see a shift to the right, to the center right, and a shift to the right-wing populists. So the share of votes of the left has been diminished in the last elections. Also for the Greens, which were very popular in the Netherlands, not like the Greens in Germany, which are facing a crisis or a malaise. In the Netherlands, the Greens are the party of the hipsters, are the party of the millennials. But despite the fact that they were quite in fashion and quite cool, they were not able to get as much votes as expected. And we see a shift to the right in the Netherlands because of all the threats and challenges of the globalization and of migration and of terrorism. And we see an overall mood, in especially in the Netherlands, that a mood of discontent, of fear, which is profiting the right more than the left, which I think is a general problem for the left.
Okay, and but basically, would you then characterize the strength of the PvdA as being that legacy of having built up that kind of society, or being a core force in building up the kind of Dutch society you see today? And basically, that strength is you can build on these foundations to go forward.
Yes. Now, the strength of the social democracy, still is its personnel. The best politicians in the Netherlands still are social democrats, more or less. That's even enemies or opponents, political opponents, would say that the ministers of the Dutch Labour Party belonged to the best politicians of the Netherlands. People like Dijsselbloem or Koenders or Timmermans or Asscher, they are all well-respected and high-quality professionals, sometimes a bit too far to the right, as is true in the case of Dijsselbloem within the Eurozone. But you cannot doubt their professionalism and quality, and the same applies to some mayors in the Netherlands. The mayor of Amsterdam is very popular in the Netherlands, which is a social democrat. The mayor of Rotterdam, who is the first Moroccan Dutch mayor of Europe, even together with London, the first Muslim mayor of a big city, together with the London mayor. These people are very strong and popular in our country. So that's still the case. That because we were, of course, a classical, traditional governing party, with all the deficits of that, because if you are governing all the time, you tend to lose some of your connection to society. You can isolate yourself in government. So there's a strength and a weakness in this regard, that because we were the permanent governing party, you are isolating yourself from the day-to-day worries of people, but at the same time you are producing very well governing politicians. Mm-hmm. So that's a strength and a weakness at the same time.
And then, moving on to the opportunities and particular threats of social democracy. So where do you see the opportunities for the PvdA to, change course? And, where are the particular threats? I mean, you mentioned fragmentation as a weakness. I mean, polarization, fragmentation is certainly a threat going forward. So, but where do you see these two categories?
Yeah, they're combined. One of the biggest problems facing the center-left or the progressives is what I always call the clash of globalization. We find in literature that in our societies there's a clash around the issues of globalization between two classes in society, you could even say, between the higher educated and the lower educated, between the cosmopolitan, what they call cosmopolitan, and the nationalist communitarian people, the anywheres and the somewheres. For me, that's a bit too black and white, to be honest. I think this way of thinking is not really interested in a middle class society where it's much more complex, but there's some truth in this clash around issues of globalization between the higher educated and the lower educated, especially in terms of identity politics. And this refers to the European Union. Are you in favor of European integration, or do you feel threatened by European integration? This especially refers to the issue of migration and Muslim migration. Do you feel threatened by migration, mass migration? Do you feel threatened by labor migration for your job, yes or no? These tensions, these are hurting the center-left and the Social Democratic People's Parties in the core. And that's very visible in the Netherlands, that we have a completely fragmented electorate, which is at war about these kind of issues. And here we see the enormous attraction of the right-wing populist movement in the Netherlands, attracting the former classic electorate, the stamwähler, of the Social Democratic parties to their party. So the strengths of the left-wing populists, the Socialist Party in the Netherlands, the SP, comparable to the German Linke, or the Wilders Party, the right-wing populists, who are dealing with the cultural backlash of globalization, they seem to be very attractive for the former electorate of the Social Democratic Big Ten Party. And I think this is one of the main problems and main causes for the crisis of social democracy. At the same time, in this story is also the opportunity, because a lot of people say we have to rebuild the People's Party. We have to overcome these divides in society. We have to overcome the divide between the migrants population on the one hand and the lower educated population on the other hand. We have to overcome the divide between the cosmopolitans and the so-called national communitarians. We can only have one future as a country if we are able to overcome these divides, and for that you cannot overcome divides with a fragmented political system. No, you need a binding mission. You need cooperation, and you need understanding to solve these divides and conflicts. And for that you need the former people's parties of Christian democracy and social democracy. So in this story, there's both a threat and an opportunity.
And what do you think are the kind of topics that can be used to reconnect to, well, the different parts of the constituencies that you mentioned have been drifting apart as a result of the pressures of globalization falling differently or impacting differently on different people? I mean, how do you see, how can you bridge this this disconnect, and with what kind of political agenda?
I think that for the left, especially, a return to socio-economic issues is very important. We have become culturally too liberal, and in combination with becoming economically too liberal. And that's a suicide letter to social democracy. You cannot both be cultural liberal and economically liberal at the same time. That's the end of social democracy. So you can remain culturally liberal, but that means that on the economic front, you have to go into inequality, you have to bring security and certainty back into society. Because if you look at a country as the Netherlands, we are living in a hyper-flexible society at the moment. People are not getting fixed jobs anymore. Young people are not getting fixed jobs anymore, and people from, if they have the age of 50 or more, they also are not hired for fixed jobs anymore. So the whole labor market has become one big flexible system, which is very detrimental, very problematic for a labor party, which always invested its whole ideology and values in certainty and security on the front of labor. So we made big mistakes as social democrats in the last decades. Neoliberalism is a bit too brutal a word. It's quite. I don't like this easy term of neoliberalism, but we have had some neoliberal collaboration in the last decades. And we were not courageous enough, I think, against big companies and the whole world of business interests. And people sense that. People sense that we betrayed our values in this respect, and we are paying a price for that at the moment. So I think to restore an agenda of economic equality in a very hyper-flexible society, is more detrimental to the lower classes of our society than to the higher class of society. The flexibility is more a problem for the lower strata than for the higher strata in society. So we have to restore that balance. Otherwise, people will be will remain threatened, will have the perception of being threatened by globalization, by Europe, by migration. And if we cannot deal with that threat or that perception of threat and fear, we are not winning any trust and social credibility back at all.
So basically, your argument then is that the shift towards identity politics has neglected the socioeconomic space where conditions have effectively worsened for a lot of people.
That's a good summary. That's a very good summary.
Yeah. And basically that sort of neglect of socioeconomics led to the fragmentation of the electorate that we now see. And basically you would have to counterbalance this by moving back to socioeconomic issues, but without necessarily sacrificing the advancements in cultural liberty.
Of course.
But refocusing of socioeconomics against the backdrop of cultural progress might be the best direction to travel.
Yes. But there are some weaknesses there as well, because I always say that we have the Social Democrats or the Christian Center left has two main flaws vis-a-vis the center-right. And this has to do, and you will always see it in the German election campaign, it has to do with economic competence, and it has to do with law and order, innere Sicherheit. And if you are not credible or trusted by the wider electorate on these two key issues, economic competence and innere Sicherheit, law and order, you will lose all elections. And still that's the case. Still we look at Schulz at the moment in Germany with his agenda of sociale Gerechtigkeit, social justice. Social justice is great, fine, but it's an amendment to the two other levels of the Maslow pyramid, which are economic security and law and order. And we are still not able to be credible and trusted on these fronts of economic competence and law and order, especially not in a world of terrorist threats and radicalization and Salavism, etc. We are weak on these two key issues, and I think so going back to the socio-economic agenda does not mean let's go into social justice again and only talk about equality. No, we are living in a much more tougher world where you also have to be trusted on managing the economy, on managing how managing business. We are very weak at business. experience in the left. We have a lot of talks about how to run businesses, but we are not very experienced in management of big companies in the left. So that's a weakness. That's a flaw. The same applies to the law and order issue. We tend to be very secondary in this field. We are called the party of the migrants, so we tend to defend migrants first and attacking neo-Nazis at the same time, which I think is a good position. But we are not seen and trusted as the party of dealing with the negative effects of mass migration and refugee crisis, etc. Even in Germany, where Angela Merkel was the main factor in dealing with the refugee crisis in 2015, she still is more trusted on this issue than the SPD. And that's a big lesson, I think, for the center-left, how to be credible and trusted while maintaining your values on the fields of economic competence and of law and order. That's if you are in this kind of complex society with a lot of insecurities, these are key for any electorate. And social justice and equality are very important, but they should be treated as a third part of the whole puzzle.
Or you have to frame it probably in one broad stroke. I mean, the concept of security, and admittedly, the problem is that you probably cannot define all of this just in an election campaign, because it probably takes a lot of more preparation to convey that kind of competence. But there cannot be security without social justice, in the sense that if you are the left behind in society, there is by definition no security for you. So what the bracket could be, or the solution of this dilemma that you sketch, is to define a broader idea of security, which contains law and order, which basically is physical security, and economic security, which is related to two elements of economic progress. That's the competence argument, that you can manage the economy well. You are competent at steering an economy macroeconomically. But at the same time, on the personal level, I mean, the social justice argument is effectively also a social security argument for individual people. Because especially if you're the precariat, right? So if you're one of the left behinds, there is no economic and social security for you and your family. And the fear is that you are, left behind even further in the future.
That's good point. But the problem with the Social Democrats is when they talk about social justice, or when they talk about the left behind, people in Germany, in Gelsenkirchen, they don't understand, or they don't trust the Social Democrats that they mean them in Gelsenkirchen. They think that when Social Democrats talk about the left behind, they may also point at the left behind in Bulgaria, or they might point at the left behind in Africa, or they conceive the refugees in Africa as the left behind, where they should care for. And this completely unfocused language and discourse about solidarity, to whom does it really? If you talk about social justice and equality and left behind, who are you talking about? This unclearness about all these different forms of solidarity, international solidarity, global solidarity, European solidarity, national solidarity, this conceptual mix-up of social democrats is, I think, one of the main causes for its crisis. We are not trusted at the international theater when we talk about social justice and about the left behind. And that's a tough lesson, but that's what you can see in a lot of research in the Netherlands. That the concepts and the language of the Social Democrats are too unfocused for people to feel included.
So you need to develop a much more clear and strategically focused narrative, and that obviously you cannot do within a few weeks of an election campaign. But that ground has to be prepared for a long time.
We need a lot of value. We need a lot of analysis, and we as a center left and Social Democrats, we need a lot rebuilding. Also, the societal, the analysis of society should be much more sharper and focused. And also, that's also one of the things I wanted to bring forward here. For me, it's a big question. Why is this enormous populist movement, right-wing populist, especially in Western Europe, why is it so strong in the most successful, egalitarian, prosperous countries in Europe? If you look at strong right-wing populist parties in Europe, you talk about Switzerland, you talk about Austria, you talk about Flanders, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, the Netherlands. Globally speaking, we are talking about paradise here. These are the most prosperous, most egalitarian, most happy countries in the world. But still, or because of that, there's an enormous right-wing populist revolt going on within paradise. And I think that the lesson for the Social Democrats is this has to be combined. These are the lower middle class is alarmed about, can we maintain this social democratic paradise in the new global age? That's for me the alarm of the right-wing populists. Can we maintain Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, Switzerland the way it is like now? Can we maintain this model of society in the future? And the alarm signal, which is very problematic because right-wing populism can be very dangerous for democracy and for the Rechtsstaat, for the liberal democracy, if it's not understood well. But this alarm in the most happy, prosperous, social democratic countries in Europe of a populist movement should be taken very, very serious by the social democratic governing elites. And I'm not really sure that we understand the message, even till today.
Rene, and the final question, basically, do you see any signs internationally that somebody is understanding the message? So do you see any maybe good examples or role models of, social democratic or progressive parties shifting in a way that is successful in reconnecting with core constituencies?
Yeah, it depends on your conception of social democracy and your personal flavor. I see a Danish social democratic party being quite successful in reconnecting with their former constituency of working class voters. But they do it in a very brutal and harsh way by taking over a big part of the right-wing populist agenda, being very xenophobic in defending their welfare state and a welfare system and their national culture. There you see a shift, which is one of the options, but it's very much disliked by the majorities now in the social democratic parties. You see other developments like the Corbyn radicalization within. He's taking over a established centre-left party by his own more radical grouping, which is a strange model. Corbyn, I like the energy of his movement, but I don't like his proposals or his political platform. For me, there's a problem in general with parties, political parties. I don't see any young people becoming member of parties anymore. We have these movements like Macron. So I'm looking for the new generation, which I'm very hopeful about the millennials. I see a lot of idealism. I see a lot of social values, which I would call even social democratic, within this new generation. But I don't see them invest their social energy into the parties of their grandfathers, the social democratic parties. I think we should be very keen on developing new parties, new party coalitions, party alliances within the left, especially in the Netherlands, where we see all these small parties. I think we have to look for a regrouping where this new energy of the millennials can be very fruitful. That would be my most hopeful statement at the moment.
Okay, well, to sum it up, the situation is difficult, but there is hope for the future, especially if there's a way to get the millennials involved in party politics, which so far they've been rather put off by. Rene Cuperus, thank you very much for joining us today. And, I'm absolutely sure we will have many opportunities to come back to this issue, because the problems, but also the opportunities, are probably not going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you don't miss future episodes by subscribing to Social Europe Podcast. You can also read our articles on www.socialeurope.eu and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter @Social Europe. Until next time.